Hey there, internet friends, and welcome to That D Plus Show. Class is in session for the only show from that nerdy site that lets you know what kind of quality to expect right from the name. I'm your host, Trevor Starkey, and each week we'll be sitting down with guests to talk about a Disney Plus offering of their choosing. The show is made possible entirely by the support of our patrons over at patreon.com/thatnerdysite, so we are thankful to all of them. If you'd like to, if you like the show and can support us over there, we would of course definitely appreciate it. If you can't, no big deal. The fact that you're listening is awesome, and of course, we'd also love it if you like, subscribe, rate, review, and share with your friends, especially as this is the pilot episode of That D Plus Show, and we're kicking it off with my choosing. We're going to talk about a Goofy movie on this first week. I'm joined today. This is mostly often probably be a more two-person show, but today I'm joined by a couple guests from that nerdy site. Frank Bazzani.
What's up, everybody?
What's up, Frank? And Cameron Abbott.
Hey, what's going on, nerds?
Hey, what is up? So, this is gonna basically be our test episode, our pilot episode. So it's gonna kind of run through the envisioned format that I have for the show, but this might change, in the weeks to come here and there. But we will kick off a lot of these episodes by talking about why we picked this movie, and because this was a movie I picked and brought to the table. And thank you again, Frank and Cameron, for sitting down watching it to join me, so it's not just me talking to the microphone for 30 or 40 minutes or something about why I like a Goofy movie. But I picked a Goofy movie because it's one of those movies that like came out from like in my opinion, like the golden era of Disney, and it just felt like it so often got overlooked in favor of the bigger, bolder, flashier movies. And I remember just watching the movie a ton as a kid. This came out when I was about 10, and I just loved it. I had like we replayed it on VHS all the time in my household, um, and it was one of those that didn't get like a re-release or a Blu-ray release for like the longest time. So it was just there was a good like dark period where it was just like I don't know how to easily access and watch this movie. So when Disney Plus first got announced, I was like, "Yay, I'm finally going to have a nice easy way to go and watch a Goofy movie." And sure enough, when Goofy or when Disney Plus launched, Goofy movie was the very first thing I watched on the service before I dove into Mandalorian that night, and everybody was having like streaming issues and struggling and whatnot. I sat down and watched a Goofy movie, and so when we kicked off this show, it only felt fitting for me to bring this to the table as the first episode of that D Plus show, kind of bring that whole thing full circle. So a little bit of a history lesson. I kind of already mentioned this came out at April 7th, 1995. Was when it was released in theaters. So that was let's see, like 3 weeks after my 10th birthday, because yeah, March 19th, 1985 was me. Other releases of the time came out like right after Tommy Boy. Came out the same day as Bad Boys, which we are coming up on Bad Boys for Life. So I thought that was very interesting when I was looking up the kind of movie timelines. And then a week later, Don Bluth, who was like the big kind of competitor for Disney Animation at the time, he released his animation studio released The Pebble and the Penguin, and as you guys are both Arizona natives, you might also appreciate that Don Bluth is like local here to the valley and stuff. So I thought that was another nice little kind of full circle. Seemed like a fitting thing. He has like a theater company here in town now that he puts plays on. Um, in the Disney timeline of things, this was the first Disney animated movie released following June '94's The Lion King, and then Pocahontas came out a couple months later in June 1995. So that's kind of where a Goofy movie fell in the like timeline of Disney movies. And lastly, for those that did not watch but want to jump into it, the runtime for a Goofy movie is a nice, quick, and brisk 78 minutes, an hour and 18 minutes. And especially watching some other things these days, it's like, oh, I appreciate the brevity of the film. Um, a quick roll call of some of the notable names from the film. We have Kevin Limo. This was his directorial debut. He went on to direct Tarzan, 102 Dalmatians, and Enchanted for Disney. There were a couple writers on this. Magone or Magan had written some DuckTales and Goof Troop prior to this. Goof Troop being kind of the goofy like TV show predecessor. Chris Matheson wrote the Bill and Ted movies before writing this, and he is writing the new Bill and Ted movie that's coming out in the what, Bill and Ted Face the Music, I think is what that one's called.
I mean, he does great
And
work.
yeah, I mean, like looking at the IMDb for this movie, I was like, wow, these are some weird names and like weird tie-ins and all that stuff. And lastly, Brian Pimental, who was also a writer on Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin prior to this movie coming out. It starred Jason Marsden as Max, who had done a lot of live action stuff on Full House and Boy Meets World, Step by Step. He's done a lot of voiceover stuff over the years as well. Most notably, maybe for us and kind of our audience is that I identified was he played Noel in the like second Final Fantasy the second two games of the Final Fantasy 13 trilogy. He was Noel Kreis in those games. You have, of course, Bill Farmer as Goofy, who's been the voice of Goofy since the late 80s, including in all the Kingdom Hearts games. You have Jim Cummings as Pete, who's the voice of Winnie the Pooh since the 80s, and Pete since the 90s. He was also Darkwing Duck and has like literally hundreds of other credits on IMDb. Kelly Martin as Roxanne had played Daphne in one of the Scooby-Doo animated shows for a little bit prior to this, and she did some ER afterwards. Rob Paulsen as PJ, obviously like one of the most prolific voice actors I think out there, having played Raphael on the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Yakko and Pinky on Animaniacs and Pinky and the Brain. Wallace Shawn as Principal Mazer, maybe most iconic for playing Vicini from Princess Bride and Rex in the Toy Story movies. I liked that I also recently saw him as a douchey actor, aka Frank in Marriage Story on Netflix.
Oh yeah, he's great in that.
He's a fun little like appearance from him. Stacy is played by Genevieve Oy, who was most notable at this time for playing Six in the TV show Blossom.
Yeah.
And then so Frank Welker played a character I had completely forgotten about going into this movie the first time a few months back of Bigfoot. I completely forgot that there's like that Bigfoot sequence in this movie. He has 848 actor credits on IMDb. He's pretty much been every animal in any cartoon you've ever listened to. He was Nibbler in Futurama and Megatron in the Transformers cartoons. And then lastly, of course, but in an uncredited role, you have Pauly Shore playing Bobby, the Weasel, who of course had kind of made a name for himself in the stand-up scene, as well as Encino Man's son-in-law, Jury Duty, which came out like a week after this, or a couple weeks after this movie, in theaters and Biodome. So that's kind of the.
Is there a reason why he was uncredited? Like, is there? Any
I have no
trivia
idea.
about
I tried to find that out. I could not see anything. I I'm if I had to guess, it would probably be because his like aura was a little bit more like adult oriented at the time, and so maybe they didn't want to like reference the fact that he was in this movie. But I didn't know. I was hoping it'd like be revealed in
But
like the trivia of the movie.
Yeah,
but,
he has one of like the most iconic lines in the entire film.
yeah, like,
Leaning Tower of Jesus.
Yeah, iconic. Like, and he's like unmistakable. So when you do watch it and you're like, wait, like they don't say who it is. It's like, did they get like an impersonator in there, and that's why they don't like credit him? But no, he's like, I mean, he's listed, and when they did like a 20th anniversary thing at D23 a few years back, he was there with, or I don't know if he was there with the crowd, but he was either there in person or he had like pre-filmed a like thank you to everybody who's loved this movie over the years. So like it's definitely him. It's just weird that he is uncredited.
Does he reprise that role in the sequel?
Yeah, and in
Yeah.
the sequel he is credited in the sequel. So
Well, to be fair,
yeah.
he has a much more prevalent role in the sequel. In the first one, he's only in like what, 2 scenes?
Yeah.
Although
love
they're
that character,
incredibly
though.
memorable.
He's amazing.
Yeah. A lot of fun as little IT guy Bobby who loves his cheese whiz. Couple little bits of trivia. The director that I mentioned, Kevin Lima, plays Lester at Lester's Possum Park. And Stacy, as I mentioned, voiced by Genevieve Oy of Blossom fame, wears a very Blossom-esque hat with the flower on the front of it. That was kind of like the iconic Blossom thing.
Yeah, that was so 90s.
Yeah.
I wrote that as like a note. It is one of my notes. I was like, this character is designed like Blossom.
Yep. So that's kind of the a lot of the like history and trivia about the film. So I want to ask you guys because I certainly already know my answer, and we'll get into that a little bit. But for you guys, what's your like history with the film? Had you watched it more like in your youth and more closer to when it came out, or is it like what's your relationship with the Goofy movie? Had you watched it before? Um, or was this like one of your first times, or like had you not revisited in a while? Frank, let me
So,
throw it to you. Or
oh, go ahead.
yeah,
Yeah,
okay, go
let
ahead,
Frank
Cameron.
take it. No, no, Frank, go ahead, take it.
All right, Frank, go ahead.
Yeah, so I had seen it before, and I definitely haven't seen it in a long time, like at least 10 years, maybe.
Hmm.
Maybe probably more at least, but I know it's been at least 10. And this is one I definitely remember liking as a kid, and but I had only seen it maybe like 2 or 3 times. Like I don't remember the whole movie really until kind of watching it now. And I definitely remember it, and I remember liking it, but I think this isn't one I don't think I rewatched like frequently, and I don't think it was like on TV or anything very frequently, at least for like when I was growing up.
Yeah, it's one that, like I said, it didn't really seem to get much in the way of like a re-release treatment, and part of that I think comes from the fact that it was like a so like the bigger movies like Lion King and Pocahontas that I mentioned earlier are like official like Walt Disney Animation Studios animation movies, whereas like this was very much from like the TV department, just kind of brought up to the level of a theatrical release. Um, so that it didn't have that prestige, especially as like the first Disney movie to come out after The Lion King. It's always living in the shadow of that. So yeah, it's one of those where it's like I wish that it had gotten a little bit more love from the studio and stuff, but instead it I think kind of ended up becoming more of like a little cult classic kind of thing.
That's
How
what
about
like
you?
it's. I
Okay.
think it. I think it's kind of funny though that it is more like that B team because I actually like I love the way it's animated and kind of the style like and I like it's almost like a little bit dirtier, you know. Like I really dig that about the movie.
Yeah, and it definitely has a much more meta feel than I remember it having. Like the fact that like Goofy when they play like 20 questions in the car, if like Goofy guesses Walt Disney as a person that exists, it's like, oh, he's just like completely breaking the fourth wall. Like he knows that he's a cartoon kind of thing. That's a weird thing. And so yeah, I liked those kinds of moments. How about you, Cameron? What's your relationship with a Goofy movie?
So, like many things that I have a deep personal history and love about, it's something I don't talk about a lot. That's something that you'll probably find a lot as we continue this show. As we continue to do this show, is I'm the kind of person that there's things that are very special to me that I keep really close to my heart and close to my chest. Because even though they're very popular, I don't want to seem bandwagony about
Okay.
it. It's just so a Goofy movie came out after. So I grew up watching the Goof Troop after school. Except I wasn't after school for me because I was like in pre-K at the time, and so I used to watch a Goof Troop on ABC after school, and it was part of the afternoon block they did. And I would watch that, and then a Goofy movie was announced and came out, and I saw it in theaters and loved it. Fell deeply, deeply in love with it. Just totally enthralled by the film to the point where I got the VHS tape for my birthday, and I watched that so many times that I wore it out. Like
Hmm.
the film was suddenly missing sections because the film had worn so thin that it was not being able to play. And so, particularly in a very specific spot. Now, there I have a like this is also one of the early films that introduced me to the I not like the concept and idea that I have anxiety.
Okay.
The the hotel scene up until the like the crossroads scene.
When they're just riding in the car silently.
No, no, no. Yeah, right in the car silently, and then Goofy tests Max,
Yeah.
and Max, quote unquote, fails the test, and it's just like that entire like section of the film like just riddled me with anxiety growing up. Love the film. Like it's one of my all time favorite Disney films. I think it's not only super underrated. I think that I like that it. I don't think it's currently considered quote unquote underrated so much as it's just not popular. It's a very infamous film. It's not like as a Disney film. It's very infamous. It's stellar. It's if you ask people who have seen it, they usually tell you, yeah, it's really amazing. But it's not just it. Like you said, it just wasn't as popular as the other '90s Disney films because it wasn't Lion King or Aladdin or Little Mermaid. You know these enormous cultural touchstones in the cultural zeitgeist of the '90s that Disney dominated with. A Goofy movie was one of their sort of B tier movies.
Yep.
But it's something that I latched onto deeply. My friend group latched onto deeply. Goofy, it was more popular in my friend group than Mickey Mouse. Like, I like people like don't realize that I'm a big Disney kid, and this is something that I'm really excited about the show because I kind of get to show off like flex my Disney kid muscles a bit here. Because I've kind of been like not closeted so much, but like I've been kind of quiet about being a Disney kid because Disney's so precious to me. I love Disney. And this show is going to be a great opportunity for me to, like I said, flex those Disney kid muscles. But I was like, for me growing up, Goofy was way more, like I loved Goofy and Donald way more than I liked Mickey. Because Mickey was a square. And, but what I loved, and then like, but things like Darkwing Duck, I almost called them the gummy bears, but it's the, like anyway, the entire like afternoon Disney lineup from the early to mid 90s was like, I was raised off of that. Like my family's a big Disney family. Like we own like at one point in time, like we were collecting, first we started collecting all the, like we owned every Disney film. And even really older films like Pete's Dragon, old school Pete's Dragon I'm talking about. And
my family had pretty much, we had shelves full of all the puffy VHS cases.
Those white, like, awesome.
Oh yeah, those big, like you're right, puffy. It was puffy because it was like air bubbles were put into it to keep the cassette tape nice and safe.
Yeah, the iconically Disney VHS cases.
The big honking white ones, yeah.
Yep.
Like,
if
I was going to a sleepover or I was going, like, if we were going on a trip, like I had a bundle of those under my arm that I was taking with me. Like it was just like my third birthday. For my third birthday, I got Aladdin. For my, I think it was my 6th or 7th birthday, I got a Goofy movie. And like I said, I wore that tape out. I love a Goofy movie to the point where, like I, was at one point in time, like I was talking to people and I found out that they were doing, I wasn't able to be a part of it, but they, like, I have people in like my area here in Mesa, Arizona, where I now live again, thank goodness. After living out in the desert, for a while, like the real desert.
Welcome back to humanity.
Yeah, civilization for sure, for real. But this is what's awesome is I realized when we were doing this, I was like, I gotta look that up, and sure enough, I went to it. They put out, it's called A Goofy Movie After Today, shot for shot live action remake. Mm-hmm. It's by a dude that like is in like the like local group among our, like my family and the multiple families around in the area that I live now, but also that I grew up with. And one of them's Ted Sowards, and Ted Sowards and his brother kind of formulated this project with a bunch of people that I went to school with. The high school that they show off in the film, that they use for the school scenes in the live shot for shot remake, is literally the high school that's like right by my house now, Westwood.
Yeah, so like I know the video you're talking about, and we have a section that we'll come around to called extra credit of like, hey, here are the other things that like you might want to watch. I've watched that video on YouTube like multiple times, again in the like the dark periods where I couldn't easily access a Goofy movie or something. It was like, oh, these are really cool things that I've seen people do. I didn't know, I had zero idea that was like local people.
Yep, it's people I knew growing up. Like it's
very cool.
One of the guy who plays the principal was literally my drama teacher from high school.
Nice.
So it's such a like I have such a deep love for this film and a deep love for Disney as a whole. Um, and it's so great to be talking about these kind. I'm really excited for us to really dig in deep to the greater library of Disney for this show. But for me, I adore A Goofy Movie. It's one of my favorites, and gosh, I love it. I'm so excited to talk about it.
Very cool. Yeah, I mean, so we already touched a little bit on kind of my history with this, in like why I picked it and stuff. But yeah, it very much was same kind of story as you. Like we wore the tape out, and I think had to get another copy of it basically because we would watch it, my sister and I, and then we would throw it in our like fast rewinder, and it would just like burn through rewinding the tape in like 5 seconds or whatever, or like I don't know, a minute or whatever, and then we'd throw it back in the VHS and like watch it all over again. It's the kind of like I liken it to like my friends that are parents that have kids that like had to hear Frozen over and over and over again for the last 5 years. Like that's probably what my parents were having to deal with for a Goofy movie was because in particular like the Powerline songs were just like
Oh,
my sister and I would constantly scream them. And like I remember like the other songs less, like the Possum one and On the Open
After
Road and stuff like
Today.
that. But yeah, like the 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 Powerline Eye to Eye and Stand Out were just like we would just sing the crap out of those as we run up and down like our hallways and scream bloody murder and stuff like that. And yeah, I very much like loved that movie growing up, and then did kind of come to a period where, like especially after moving out and stuff, it was just not something I could easily access because even if I wanted to go and borrow my parents like the VHS copy or whatever, I didn't have a VHS player anymore. I had DVDs and Blu-rays eventually and all that stuff. So there wasn't a good, easy way for me to go back and watch a Goofy movie. And I would go and find, like I said, I would scour YouTube and find people that had done these cool like live action, you know, riffs or versions of a Goofy movie, and that was where I started finding out like, oh, a lot of other people like this movie too, and it like was a creative spark for them as well. That's really cool. I love that. It's one of those things. On rewatching it recently, I think it starts to it has started to sink in maybe why I gravitated to this movie so much. In particular, like even last night when I was rewatching it for to record this, um, the fact that Goofy starts the movie out as like a photographer and taking like kids pictures and stuff. That was what my dad did when I was growing up. My dad like had kind of moved away from corporate America, worked at Park and Swap, which is basically a swap meet here in Phoenix, where like he would work there on the weekends. People would park their cars and walk up and down like a big old parking lot filled with like vendors and trailers and booths and stuff. And my dad had a booth every weekend down there where he'd called Photogenics, where he would take people's pictures and put them on mugs and T-shirts and calendars and stuff like that. A whole bunch of just novelty things. And he would do what Goofy is doing in the beginning of the movie of like, all right, smile, smile, and he'd like have weird little like squeaky things that would make the kids laugh because that was like a big kind of section of his client base. And then like coupling that with the idea that my family loved doing like cross country road trips and stuff. And we would go to visit family in Michigan. We wouldn't fly. We would drive,
Mm-hmm.
north up to Idaho and then west to Michigan. And then when we'd come back, we would drive, or east to Michigan, sorry. Then we would drive like south to, Missouri and then like head back west and do like we would stop at the big rubber band balls and all sorts of those kinds of like kitschy things that Goofy loves to really try and take Max to in this movie. And so like it's not until like at the time when I was growing up I was not thinking that like in depth about it, and it's not until I've like started rewatching it now as an adult where I can like look at that and critically be like, oh, I'm the reason this like resonated with me was because it was my childhood. I wasn't as, rebellious against like my parents wanting to take us on road trips, but that's also in part because like they would bribe us with stuff. Like they would if we were like good for a certain number of hours on the road trip, like they would give us a treasure from a treasure box or something like that. And we also had like this giant Explorer van that had like a Nintendo plugged into it and a small TV and stuff. So we had plenty of other things to keep us entertained. It wasn't just singing high hopes on the road, trying to go to visit family in Michigan and stuff. But even not even the Michigan trips, but like we would take regular road trips to Disneyland and stuff, and that was just like that was our childhood. And so getting to like relive in the smallest of ways those kinds of sensations and kind of taking me back, and that nostalgia definitely resonates when I watch a Goofy movie now. And so it's and then also just Max's inherent and innate theatricality and doing and trying to be Powerline and all that stuff, and certainly tied into like me doing a lot of the performing arts and stuff in like high school. So so yeah, that's kind of my history with a Goofy movie. And then, like I said earlier, when Disney Plus launched, the first thing I sat down and watched at midnight, or whatever time it came out, because I was basically sitting there, staying up late to be like, okay, when can I actually download and when can I access Disney Plus? Because I really want to watch a Goofy movie, and I watched it, and then I've watched it again last night, and it was interesting because the first time I rewatched it, I had completely like forgotten about the Bigfoot sequence of the film. Like there were just like chunks of the movie that had over 10, 15 years of not watching it, just kind of like escaped my mind. Like I knew he starts out with the whole thing at the school, and then his dad says like, okay, we're gonna go and do this road trip. And then there are complications that ensue in the road trip, but I didn't remember like what they all were. Like if I'd had to think about it and like recite the structure of the story, like Bigfoot might have been thrown in like the montage of stuff that happens somewhere. At some point Max changes the map.
Oh no, but he has a much bigger part in that film.
Yeah, well, exactly, and that's but I had just forgotten that. I remembered Max changes the map, and that being like the key like turning point for Max in the movie. But I didn't remember like what gave him the opportunity. I didn't remember that they had been trapped in the car for Bigfoot. So like kind of transitioning into like favorite and least favorite moments of the film. I have a lot of favorites, but like and it's not that it's a bad moment. It's just like interesting to me, and because I don't really have any like least favorite, or like I don't look at this movie and think, oh, there's like really bad moments in there. But like just the fact that I had blocked out the whole Bigfoot sequence and the silliness that happens there, I would throw that into like that category, I guess, of like, oh, it didn't stick with me, so it's certainly not a favorite moment of mine. But before I dive into a little bit more of that, Frank, let me throw it over to you. What are some of your favorite moments and favorite aspects of this movie?
I do really like this movie, and it's kind of like you said. Like I don't really have like a least favorite part of it, because like I mean I do really enjoy kind of like the whole movie throughout. But one of the things I really did enjoy that I think is one of my favorite parts, kind of like in this rewatch going back, is well, I guess I will say too, I do love Pauly Shore's character that you mentioned. We talked about Weasel and his like obsession with the cheese.
Hmm.
Um, like I love when he's like, "Do you have the payment?" And then it's basically just like Cheese Whiz, and then they're just disgusted as he just eats this whole can. Like,
Yeah.
I also love the part where, or what the part that I really loved on kind of this rewatch that I think I didn't probably notice when I was a kid, is the like that running joke of like the nuns, like
Oh,
they're
yeah.
like in the road trip
Hmm.
like song, and then they're in the like the diner, and then they're like at the monster truck rally with them, and then they're like at the Powerline concert. Like I like that they just like follow the entire road trip and have their like own adventure. Like I
Yeah.
think that was probably one of my favorite parts on like this entire rewatch.
Yeah, the one of the things that I saw when I was looking at trivia is that there were a couple like runners that got cut from the movie, including like giving a little bit more focus to the nuns, as well as the married couple that you see on the road trip. That's like the big woman and the smaller guy. I think they had a few more like moments throughout the journey originally, but yeah, they ended up getting cut for, I don't know if it was for time or pacing or whatever. But yeah, the trivia mentioned that a couple of those ancillary things got cut.
I just realized something. Correct me
Yeah.
if I'm wrong. Please do, because I'm now obsessed with this thought. Is it just me, or did nuns have a lot more prevalency in the 90s?
So one of the another kind of trivia thing about the nuns in this movie is that they were more or less designed off of the Sister Act nuns.
Ah, okay, good.
Um,
I thought so.
That's what
I
I was
thought
gonna
so.
say. Hell
Okay.
yeah.
so it's I mean like they were certainly in the mindscape because of the Whoopi Goldberg movie,
Whoopi Goldberg
and
put
that's
nuns in vogue for sure.
yeah, and I think that's probably what you're like the combination of those two things I think play a factor in your like oh nuns were a big thing in the 90s.
But they were also like in tons of the because of Sister Act, of course. They were in
Yeah,
tons of parody films in the '90s. And you know what? It's nuns used to be an easy joke to talk about. Basically, like
the
people,
Catholic
people,
Church. And
people
then we
reacting.
stopped needing easy jokes to talk about the Catholic Church because they gave us plenty on their own.
Yeah. Oh, I guess that's true. Oh, now I'm sad. Now I'm really sad.
That's probably why they started falling out of vogue. But yeah, I mean,
Probably.
like I still like the most iconic nun sequence I can think of recently, and I don't even know if it's a nun, but like in Lady Bird because she's going to like a Catholic school. Like her teacher is a nun. I remember
Yeah.
like that being a thing, and so like that's where I tend to see them now is like oh it's a Catholic school scene or something like that.
Now
You've
they're
got
symbols of
sister,
repression rather than
sister, blah
symbols
blah
of
blah.
fun.
Yeah, or there was also a good play that they turned into a movie a few years, or probably a decade or so back, called Doubt.
Ooh,
That
that's a
centers
good
around
movie.
a nun who is struggling with kind of whether or not to believe her pastor or this like mother who comes saying that the pastor abused her child, and so
Priest,
she
yeah.
struggles. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Or
No,
priest,
that's a
sorry.
really good film. Meryl Streep plays the nun in it. She's really good.
Did she play the nun? Because I remember it was I don't remember the actress's
Phil,
name.
Philip
Sherry
Seymour.
Marie Scott or something.
It was Philip
Yeah,
Seymour
Phil.
Hoffman and Meryl Streep in that film.
Okay. Yeah, you're right. I'm guessing I'm thinking of the actress who played it on Broadway.
Mm.
So nuns are still out there, just just maybe not
Not as
as
fun as they used to be.
yeah, yeah. The, not but then you also had since this is a Disney Plus tie-in, Raven Simone played the Whoopi Goldberg character when Sister Act went to Broadway and when they made it into a Broadway play. So it's another
Really? Raven
like
Simone
fun.
was Sister Act? Oh my
Yeah,
gosh,
yeah,
it's so
she was.
cool.
Yep. So bringing it all full circle here on Nun Talk, the
I was gonna
podcast
say,
within
like,
the podcast on
we
D
need a
Plus
new
show.
Sister Act film. Let's do it. New Sister Act reboot starring Raven Simone. Let's go. Let's make it happen. Disney Plus.
Yeah.
Let's make that. Let's make that a film. Let's go. Come on,
I
guys.
feel like it's one of those things that has been like rumored for a while. In the era that we live in of like constant remakes or like reboots and stuff like that, I feel like Sister Act is one that's like it's got the IP has enough like cachet that it's been floated out there for a while. But
Yeah, but you got to make
uh,
it right. You can't be messing up.
yeah,
You can't be messing it up. Sister Act is
yeah.
too special.
Instead, we get cats. Anyway, so what are some of your favorite moments and scenes in the film there, Cameron?
Okay. This is hard because it's like you say your favorite moments from a film that is literally chock full of every single moment is a favorite moment, except for like I will say the hotel, like the hotel scene,
Yeah,
where like Pete finds out what he's done and tells Goofy, and Goofy's just like no my like, and it's that, and it's like
the whole thing's like animated like a horror film where like suddenly all the color is gone and they're just like grays and greens. And,
yeah,
yeah,
it's so
creepy.
anxiety driving as a kid. I was watching that. It's like, oh,
And then PJ has that moment where he's just like, maybe I should
Yeah,
leave,
yeah,
and just like skulks out, and like it's like when you were a kid and like somebody's parents were fighting or something.
yeah.
Like,
It was just, but I will say, so like you said, Trevor, there's tons of memories of road trips. So I grew up in a family of 5 kids, 2 parents, and my dad, my mom was, my parents did like side hustles. They like catered and did other things for side hustle money. My mom babysat a lot of kids over the years, but primarily like the income was like my dad's teaching salary. And so I don't know if you know this, but teachers don't work in the summer,
hmm
which meant my dad wasn't getting a paycheck in the summer. So
that was his arrangement because I know some schools will like they'll divide out the payment throughout the year.
Yeah,
so that you do have income coming in over the summer.
that's not how my dad's contract was set up. So
Gotcha.
my dad, so during the summers, it was actually cheaper for us to like be on vacation than it was for us to stay at home. But like, you don't travel by plane in the 90s with 5 kids.
Right. Yeah.
You just don't do that. So we spent a lot of time on the road. Like you said, Trevor, I actually learned how to read a map when I was about 5 years old. And by the time I was 7, I was the person in charge of the map and making sure, like, kind of measuring out how far we were from, where the rest stops were, all sorts of stuff. Now, granted, now as an adult, I know that those are all on signage. But at the time, it felt really special that my parents, like, when Max is given, like, the navigator duties, like, I felt like a deep connection to that moment because I was like, oh, I've been trusted with the navigator duties. Like my mom taught me how to read a map when I was 5, and I was just off from the races on there. I still love maps.
Did she make it like a big show of it, like Goofy does? Did you get knighted with the map
No,
itself?
I did not know. My mom, I was like, Mom, how far away are you from me? And she says, here's the map. This is how you read it. So,
I like that moment in the diner though, like because I love that even like all the truckers and everybody like all cheers and is like happy for
yeah,
him.
that's
like,
such a great thing. I will say so, like the road trip moments, but also the camping. So growing up, like I was a Boy Scout. My dad hates camping. My dad's idea of camping is like staying at a Marriott. So my dad hates camping, but because there's 5 kids and he was a teacher, there was never like we could not Winnebago it up like Pete does. Pete and PJ do.
Mm-hmm.
But that was always like the quote unquote dream for my dad would be like actually my dad hates RVs too. Funny enough. But so like the idea of like sleeping in a car instead of camping is 100% like a thing my dad does. And so like those moments of like sleeping in a car and my dad snoring is, you think my snoring can be ridiculous. My dad's is out of this world. Like growing up, like I could hear, like lived on the second floor of our house in a room that was like adjacent to where my parents' bedroom was. And sometimes if the doors were all open, like my door and their bedroom door were open, I could like hear my dad snoring. And it's like echoing through the stairwell. Now my dad will deny to this day that he ever snores. Because that's my father. But like the idea of like this like huddling up in a car eating like the eating the soup, like those are that in particular, that reminds me of like just some Boy Scout memories, just camping memories in general, like the time that like we left the food behind for dinner. And so for dinner as a Boy Scout, we had one night was hot dog and like hot dog stew. It was awful. Hot dog stew. Oh,
I mean,
man.
like, yeah, I feel like making that a stew just makes that a worse meal.
Well, there wasn't enough
Like,
hot dogs
just
for everybody. That was the problem.
oh, okay, yeah.
And so we cut up the hot dogs and put it into like a basic stew type mix that somebody had a can of. It was basically somebody who brought like backup food in case they were still hungry after dinner. One of the leaders.
Gotcha.
So that ended up being like our dinner. So like that, like making like MacGyvering yourself a meal like that, it was totally like in my memories of growing up. But also like I grew up down the street from a family that they had an RV because they hunted. They'd leave for like 3 weeks and just go hunting as like a family. And so they had this RV to kind of like live out of during that time. And so I was always just like this thing of like, man, I wish my family had an RV. That'd be so cool. And it's like, but my family had an Astro van. Like, do you remember those? Those big box Chevy vans that were the Astro vans?
Yeah, okay.
So for those of you who may not know, you have to understand. So Chevy had these truck frames with wheels and stuff, but they were trying to sell vans. And so what they did is they built a chassis where it was basically just a box. And they built this chassis out, so there were these big box vans that would just drive around back in the 90s. My family had one of them. and they were Astrovans, and they were like, what would happen is we had 5 kids, and there's 6 back seats. So what we'd actually do is we'd take out the middle seat, and we'd put it off to the side on our driveway, because nobody's just going to come and steal a giant middle seat from a car. Thankfully. And we would put down blankets and pillows and stuff, and then in between my parents we had this little VCR TV combo, and we would just bring a bunch of videos and VHS tapes, and the Astrovan had a tape player, and we had a ton of cassette tapes. So growing up on these road trips to through Utah, California, all over Nevada, where my dad's from, all over the Southwest, going to the West Coast, just memories going to Disneyland and other stuff like that. It was just an incredible time, and I can tell you, I know every single scene to memory for You've Got Mail. Which is, by the way, is a very outdated film because of its context. There are 2 people who own bookstores, so that tells you enough.
Yeah. A bookstore that's taking over a different bookstore.
It's very early aughts. Very.
I mean,
much.
I would give it the outdated just from the fact that it is built off of the name is built off of the AOL You've Got Mail, which hasn't been relevant for 25 years or whatever.
Pretty much. But I think my favorite scene is, I have 2 favorite outright scenes. Back to the actual question you asked, not just my deep personal history with road tripping.
Okay.
Is the scene where Max gets on stage and he does the Powerline impression.
Yeah.
And then the very last scene, or not the very last scene, but one of the last scenes where they get on stage with Powerline, and Goofy turns Max's lie into truth, and they become friends with Powerline. And that was just that's such a typical 90s film thing to have happen. You could not, there's no way that could happen, especially in a post 9/11 era, where you could have these 2 people just show up like that.
Yes, definitely.
And it's so good. And Powerline is just awesome. I love Austin Creed, Xavier Woods from WWE. He cosplays as Powerline at least twice a year, and I love it. So
yeah. I remember one of the other that just reminded me, one of the other things that I loved, during the dark times where I wasn't getting to really watch Goofy movie. I remember seeing a BuzzFeed article somebody had put together of they should make a live action Goofy movie and they should cast Bruno Mars as Powerline. And it's just 18 images of Powerline and then Bruno Mars paired up, and it's just that would be perfect. Do that. Please do that.
Gosh, why don't they make or maybe just make
I mean, they're not going to do a live action because they're not going to turn Goofy into a live action character. I would.
Well, I mean, you can do it I don't know. Aren't they doing those CG Mickey movies right now? The character, the TV show of the kids, for kids, they have CGI Mickey and Goofy and stuff. Just make a new CG, make a cool CGI film.
Yeah, or give us a Goofy movie level and a Kingdom Hearts movie. That's really.
Oh my gosh! Can you imagine if it's you have to deal with Goofy, especially if you kind of frame it within the way that Goofy is framed in the Kingdom Hearts universe as this knight, commander of the Royal Guard, and it's just and what is Max in that? What is also Pete is a bad guy in that series.
Well, yeah, and they could play with that. I imagine it would, or what I immediately think of would be, was it the Atlantis from Kingdom Hearts 2, where it's a rhythm, a rhythm game, and it's basically okay, you have to do the perfect cast. But yeah. Anyway, yeah. So my couple favorite scenes really tie into, I think, yours, Cameron, because I love the beginning sequence of just all the craziness they put into the AV performance of Max doing Eye to Eye or Stand Out.
Oh, I also wanted to say a quick shout out to Jason Marsden, who plays Max, because not only did he play Noel Kreis in Final Fantasy 13 2, He is also the voice of Boone in Fallout New Vegas. Forgot to mention that.
Yeah, I saw that when I was looking it up, and I was like, oh, I didn't like I couldn't like I didn't remember placing him as Boone, but I was like, that's cool because like Boone was one of my favorite companions in that game. But I also like that was also I loved walking around with Zach Levi and Felicia Day as like my companions in that game because they were just awesome. So so that was who I tended to go towards. But until I got to them, Boone was my fave. But yeah, he was great. He doesn't do the singing in this movie, which is I guess unfortunate because he had I guess more of a Broadway bent to
Yeah,
his vocal stylings, and they didn't
there's
want to
parts of
go with that.
After Today where he has like the final actual line in After Today, and it's very Broadway esque compared to the rest of the film.
Yep,
So
yep. But yeah, the so basically anytime Powerline is involved, so Max doing the stuff at the beginning or the Powerline concert at the end, I in particular love the fact that like what makes the lie complete is the perfect cast. Like
hmm
that Goofy turn or that Max has Goofy turn that into a dance move and then Powerline's like super impressed by that. Like that's just a great way to tie like the road trip aspect of the whole thing together. It is this like when the perfect cast is introduced, it's just like okay, this is just crazy Goofy being like let's do a whole bunch of different animated poses and it'll be funny. But then like when you see it without the fishing pole and he can kind of turn it into cool moves or whatever, it's a nice little bringing the whole thing full circle. And then similar to what you were talking about, Cameron, also Pete's RV was the coolest thing when I
oh
was a kid.
gosh,
Like when it like pulls up, like completely dominates Goofy in his dumb little tent, and then like a basketball court falls out, and you get like a spa that like pulls out one side, and the bowling alley on top. I was like, that is the coolest thing. That's amazing. And then like you know a year later or something like around the same time, Road Rules came out as a
yes,
as an MTV show
yes,
where basically it was a whole bunch of guys like guys and girls going around the country doing challenges on a Winnebago and stuff, and I was like that's the coolest thing ever. I want to be on that show. And my grandmother who from my grandparents that lived in Michigan, when they would come out and visit, they had an RV that they basically had it like plopped down and they just kind of stayed in the RV. And then when they went back to Michigan and kind of they were too old to really keep coming back and forth, they sold the RV to my parents. My parents gave it to or like it was like a big family like Christmas present one year. Was
nice.
like my sister and I opened all the presents and there was like an envelope on the tree, and that was like the thing we had to open last, and we opened it up and it was like a picture of the RV, and then we walked outside and it was sitting there in our cul-de-sac kind of thing. We never ended up really using it as an RV, so much as like it got parked at like we've got a little like 2 bedroom cottage kind of thing outside of Payson, like 15 minutes outside of Payson, and it got like parked up there as like extra bedroom and extra like living space up there. And so when we would take trips up to the kind of like the holiday cabin, where again like we would watch a Goofy movie nonstop, basically. um, that would be something that we would play around in the RV up there. So yeah, that was like RVs were the coolest thing ever because of this movie, and then I never actually like used them in the RV capacity, but still super cool. And even watching it back now, it's like, yeah, that would be a really cool thing to do, like to have that kind of an RV. Even like a less amazing and grandiose RV would still be pretty cool. But Pete's was the best. So yeah, so those are some of my favorite moments from the film as well. So, with all of that said, let's go ahead and kind of wind things down a little bit. It's time for the report card for a Goofy movie, where we each can kind of sit down and grade the movie from A plus to F. So Frank, throw it to you first because I have a feeling I know the range that Cameron's going to give it. But where do you put a Goofy movie? Where would you grade if you were the teacher of this movie?
like I don't want to like grade it too high, but it is. a really good movie, and I think it's really enjoyable. And kind of like you said with the runtime, like it doesn't like overstay its welcome or anything. You can kind of get through it pretty quickly, and I think it's like fun the whole way through. So I mean, I think I would give it an A plus.
Nice. Okay. How about you, Cameron?
It's an A plus. Are you kidding me? It's an A plus.
An A plus. All right.
Yeah,
Like,
of course it is. It's
I
it's a goofy movie.
I was coming into this. I was like, there are like I'm not gonna lie that there aren't better movies than a Goofy movie. Um, especially we've already talked about some of them. Kind of this coming out in the golden era of like Aladdin and Beauty and the Beast and Lion King. But you know what? You guys have convinced me. I'm gonna go ahead and give it an A plus too. I was I was probably originally thinking more like B plus territory, but
No,
no, you're right.
Mm.
This is an
I
A
would
plus
not
movie.
give it anything less than an A. Not even an A minus. This film is an A plus film. It introduced anxiety into my life, which you might say is a negative, but I see as a positive. It introduced me to something I did not know I had. And
All right.
on top of that,
Yeah.
it's also just such a stellar film. Like if you haven't seen it, don't listen to this podcast first. Like we're rolling it up. You're not going to enjoy it as much, but it's
I mean, it's not like this movie has much in the way of
That's true.
spoilers.
also
like,
Also
you
this
can-
movie came out
as
25
soon
years
as
ago.
the
So.
as soon as the idea is introduced that like Max makes the lie and says he's gonna go like go see the Powerline concert or whatever. It's like, okay, well, somehow the movie's actually going to get him to the Powerline concert because that's just how these movies play out. So like, yeah, even if you came into this not having seen the movie, thank you for listening, but also go watch the movie because it's amazing. And it's a little bit longer than this podcast, but not much, so go check it out. um, Extra credit. So this is some other things that we would recommend if you like this movie. The things you can watch on Disney Plus are going to be the Goof Troop series. It was a one-season animated show. And an extremely goofy movie, the sequel, which admittedly I have never seen an extremely goofy movie.
It's okay.
Ever?
Like it's pretty good.
I've never watched it. It's something I will sit down and watch, now that I have Disney Plus. But yeah, because it was a direct to DVD or direct to video sequel. We just never got around to it, I guess, in our household. So yeah, it's one I never actually sat down and watched. Or it might be something that I watched at some point and I just don't remember it at all. Like, because I vaguely remember like goofy skateboarding on a college campus, but I don't remember if that was like because I remember the commercials of the movie or because I actually watched the movie. But I certainly don't have the memories ingrained from a goofy movie as any kind of similar love for an extremely goofy movie. But it's out there, available if you want to watch it. And then we've already talked about one of these things, but I had a couple YouTube videos that I would also highly recommend. The one that Cameron spoke of earlier, you can go find on YouTube, titled "A Goofy Movie After Today Shot for Shot Live Action Remake," and it is basically like taking the After Today number of a Goofy movie, and they did it kind of in live action. There's some like very clear green screening and stuff going on, but they kind of did a little like, here's what it would look like in live action. And then one that I had pulled in.
Oh, also it's like super old too. Like this was made
yeah.
this was made like 11 years ago.
Yeah, like I want to say it was like 2009 is I think what the video showed. And then the other one, which is a little bit more recent, but still like it's a from maybe 5 years ago or something. A Goofy Movie in Real Life with Peter Hollens is the title of it, and it's basically I don't know like if the whole thing was staged, but they set up kind of a stage at some kind of like festival or food trucks or something like that, and a guy comes out and pretends to be like the principal and talks about science spelling bee or whatever it is, and somebody pushes the button and like he gets like pulled away and the curtain goes down and somebody comes out in live action and starts being Max and stuff, and it ends up it's basically a medley of Stand Out and Eye to Eye and stuff, and I think maybe it's some of the like one or two other little things thrown in there, but it's like they put a thing together on a stage for it and having like a nice polished produced video, and it's really cool. So I highly recommend anybody check that out if they are a fan of the film as well. I also was just talking about that, was reminded of one last memory I wanted to highlight. when we were we all at Kind of Funny Prom? Frank, were you at Kind of Funny Prom? You were not. So when Cameron and I were at Kind of Funny Prom, there was a moment where Eye to Eye came on, and a whole bunch
Mm-hmm.
of us were like dancing around in a circle. And I remember specifically running up to Ben and Chloe, as they were the prom vengers at the time in like our little circle of friends, and I would just like drunkenly ran up to them and started singing Eye to Eye along to it. Ben has like a video of that somewhere out on Twitter that you can go out and find. So I guess that would be another extra credit if you want to go like track down that little video. But yeah, it
That
was
one's required viewing.
yeah, that was just I had a like I love my that was like my Goofy movie love shining through was when they worked Eye to Eye into the set. I just had a ton of fun with that. So, um, last little segment of the show is kind of called extracurriculars. And if you are watching anything else on Disney Plus right now, and want to kind of give it a shout out, here's the place to do it. So, I know we talked a little bit before we started recording. Frank, you have only really watched two things on Disney Plus, and both of them are things for the purpose of this show. So instead of throwing it to you, I will go ahead and kick it off and say, I am like bizarrely annoyed by how much I'm really enjoying High School Musical, the musical, the series. Um, it's I wrote up and my like best of 2019 TV shows list will be out by the time this episode goes live on Tuesday. But like it's in my top 10 shows of the year, and the finale is going to be coming out this coming Friday, and I'm for season 1. I'm like very excited to see where it goes. As somebody that didn't really care about High School Musical, I'm sure those movies will make their way onto this show at some point in time, that D Plus show. But like I just like I never really like they hit while I was in college, so I wasn't really in a super like Disney Channel movie kind of phase at the time, and so they passed me by. But for this show, these kids they got some talent, and it's the right perfect level of like cheeseball high school drama for me. So I definitely recommend that. Cameron, how about you? Any extracurriculars that you want to give a shout out for on Disney Plus?
Yeah, no, there totally is. I will say that, of course, like we talked about it on the That Nerdy podcast. I'm still messing that up, I know.
That Nerdy Site Show. It's just the name of the website and then show at the end.
Yep. Maybe when we get a couple years in, I'll remember it.
All good.
Yeah, so on That Nerdy Site Show, we talked about The Mandalorian. I'm still super enthralled by it. Baby Yoda is still my favorite thing in the entire world.
Yeah.
Baby Yoda, like, constantly I watch episodes of The Mandalorian sometimes, and Baby Yoda just heals my heart. Love him.
I wanted to do as I was watching a Goofy movie, I was like, oh, if I were a better editor, I would do so there's that meme of Baby Yoda and the Mandalorian like pushing the buttons on the ship that people have like turned into like radio stuff. I would do the Max and Goofy turning on High Hopes and the Hard Rock. I would do that.
Yes.
I would edit that sequence together. I thought about that when I was watching it last night. I was like, oh, that'd be a fun little bit. But I do not have the capacity to do that at the moment.
Somebody
so
listening to
that
the
out
show,
there.
do it. Somebody do that for us.
Yeah, if there's somebody with more a better skill set, maybe we can throw it over to Christian or Frank if you want to try and do it. You can certainly play around with editing in that. Be a funny little potential viral video.
No.
I'd be down if we want to do that and like throw it up on Twitter or something.
Yeah.
A couple things I'll shout out though on Disney Plus right now is if you do enjoy Star Wars and you finish The Mandalorian like I have, a great thing to watch is The Empire of Dreams, which is essentially the like really in-depth documentary about the making of the original trilogy of Star Wars. It's really good. It's an interview with basically people who were there from the get-go, the beginning. Also has like some stuff from like Steven Spielberg and other directors of his era, as well as like one of the very few interviews that the president of Fox at the time that Star Wars was being made, he gives a whole lot of insight into like the struggles in the boardroom with him and the board of directors, like fighting it because he believed in the vision of Star Wars that George Lucas had pitched to him years ago, and like they made it happen, and the kind of what ended up needing to happen because of it. It's very, very good. It's excellent, and it gives you an insight into George Lucas, I think, better than anything else will, and kind of his actual mindset when he's doing these sorts of things, and how he is very much a very different kind of person.
Yeah.
Especially because I think a lot of us have the idea that he's just this money hungry, grubby guy, and you understand kind of the auteur behind this guy and the kind of the image that he's presented, and it's very interesting. Also, you find out stuff about Lucasfilms, like the studio, that I had no idea about, as far as its structure. It's a very cool documentary. I highly suggest it. There's actually, and also the Imagineering series that they do. So basically,
the Imagineering story.
The documentaries on Disney Plus are outright phenomenal. Check them out.
Yeah. Yeah, I echo that. Imagineering Story, nice little. It's another one that's on. I want to say it's like my number 2 TV show of the year, basically, because I'm a huge Disneyland nerd, and yeah, that it's a little 6-part documentary series. It's all out now. I hope they figure out a way to do more and bring more back and kind of tell more cool stories about the creation and the creative juices that are flowing over there at Disney. So.
Not just that, but when you actually think about it, you're like, oh wow, no, making Disneyland, the actual amusement park, how it's incredible to imagine the monumental task of just not, it wasn't building on top of stuff, they basically terraformed that part of California to make Disneyland.
Yeah, I love they have they talk about the park opened, cement was still drying, and benches were getting sucked down into pseudo hardened cement, and then 20 or 50 years later when they opened, was it Hong Kong, or when they opened one of the Disneylands in the Asian markets, they had the same issue basically. It was 50 years later, we're still making the same mistakes. Oops. Just great little documentary. Lots of wonderful anecdotes about the history of Disneyland, and kind of all of the other Disney park and entertainment adventures. So definitely check those out. Very cool. That's going to do it for this week's episode of That D Plus Show. Thank you, Frank and Cameron, for joining me on this very first episode to talk about a Goofy movie. You can follow Frank at Irrelevant Jokes. Anything you want to shout out, Frank?
Yeah, so the day that this comes out, you should be able to go up onto the That Nerdy site, and you'll be able to check out my my games of the year 2019. I have a top 10 list that should be up by then, and then also there might be just a couple shout outs to other games that I also played that I just kind of want to give a shout out to. So that's the thing I would say to check out.
Very cool. You can follow Cameron at Rev Cabot, 2 B's and 2 T's. Anything you want to shout out, Cameron?
Yeah, stay tuned for my top 10 games of the year list. Like I said last time, I might have mentioned it. My game of the year stuff is exclusive to That Nerdy site. So if you want to check out what games I played, what games I shout out, and the ranking of my top 10 games this year, you can check that out at That Nerdy site.
Great. You can follow me at Trevor J. Starkey. And yeah, all of my best of 2019 stuff will have gone out Monday. So yesterday, if you are listening to this, the day it goes live. So you can find all of that out on the website as well. I did write-ups for my top 20 games of the year, top 20 movies of the year, and top 10 TV shows of the year. And then pretty much all week we'll be doing 2019 best ofs from the various nerds of That Nerdy site. And then all next week will be kind of the best of the decade look backs that we're putting together for those of us that are. And it'll also be our we'll have kind of our Game of the Year awards being doled out throughout next week as well. So yeah, that's gonna do it for this show. You can follow all of us and all of the latest that's going on at That Nerdy Site at That Nerdy Site on Twitter. If you liked what you heard, like I said at the top of the show, please like, rate, review, subscribe, share with your friends, all that stuff. And if you feel so inclined, you can always help support us on Patreon at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. We would love and appreciate you forever if you do. But if you can't, no worries. Thank you for joining us. As always, stay nerdy and be good to each other, and class dismissed.